Well, once again, Defence is back in the headlines today in a major speech foreshadowing the findings of the Defence Strategic Review, which is due next March. Defence Minister Richard Marles said last night in a speech to the Sydney Institute that Australia's military needed to be more self-reliant.
The reality is that a tougher environment will require a more hard-nosed Australian approach to the defence of our interests, the ability to project power, to shape outcomes and deter threats. We must marshal and integrate all arms of national power to achieve Australia's strategic objectives.
Well, where have we heard that before? Jim Rowland is New South Wales Senator, former Major General in the Australian Army, and he joins me now. Well, Jim, you and Andrew Hastie have been sounding the alarm about defence spending, about budgets, about capability for a long time. Is the Defence Minister finally waking up to this? And if so, where should he put his focus?
I think he's got to put his focus on ensuring that the Strategic Defence Review that comes out of the two-man inquiry that's occurring, he's got to put it not just on one single activity, that is, missiles out to a long range, but a spectrum of activities. We must start with an overall strategy, and the Defence Minister in his speech last night gave us an indication of how he is thinking about the strategy, and that's fine, but I think it's got to be much broader than that, because if we put all our resources into being able to reach out and strike at a great distance, then those that oppose us will come at us in a different way. I think we've got to have a spectrum. We've got to recognise a spectrum of threat, and then we've got to match that spectrum of threat, and then, and only then, should we say what we can afford.
Look, you're absolutely right, and one of the challenges we have in this portfolio in recent years, unlike earlier times when I used to work for the Howard government, is the constant turnover of defence ministers. So it then becomes the bureaucrats who are there longer than the government, indeed, certainly longer than ministers, who call the shots. That's also partly behind some of the problems we've had in this portfolio, isn't it, Jim?
Oh, I think that's exactly right. But it always comes back to the government in a period of time like this where the threat is difficult to define. It always comes back to the government to carry the people with them. Now, we failed to do that as a coalition. Much to my regret, and I've just got to, I certainly hope that we can all contribute to this to encourage this government to do it. What we can't afford to do, Peter, is to wait till March of next year, get an answer from the Strategic Defence Review in March of next year, then take 9 months to figure out what we're going to do, then another year to figure out how we're going to finance it. We do not have the time.
Talk to me about this personnel crisis referenced by the Minister last night. We're seeing a high attrition rate with defence personnel. Yes, in part it's recruitment, but once we get them in there, are we looking after our people as we should?
I looked at the figures the other day for the three services, and they were all below 10%. That is a wastage rate of 10% per year. Now, that's not too bad a wastage rate. This government has said they're going to recruit 18,500 people in the next couple of years in order to be able to staff quite properly, staff and man all parts of their planned acquisitions. Now, that's only the first step. To me, it seems as though what we need to do is we need to create a military which is nasty enough, talk about missiles, which is sustainable, that is, it can fight for a long time, and which has mass, which is bigger. And Peter, what this requires is a military reserve, Army, Navy and Air Force, a part-time military reserve. By all means, put all your big money into a permanent full-time military, but then create what Ukraine has created, and that is a sense of ownership of the Australian people of the defence function. At the moment, we have a very small defence reserve, and it's not well equipped. and it has the wrong focus entirely. We should have 100,000 people in our reserve at the absolute minimum.
It makes such good sense, and if you're able-bodied like I am and a lot of people are, we've all got to find the time to put our hand up for the reserve, and I think this is where employers can be supported to give something back, to give people the time to do the training. I know there's a X number of days that is around for reserve training, but we could probably do more. I want to ask you about comments you've made in Senate estimates about the culture of secrecy in defence. What do you mean by that?
Now, the first question I asked in estimates was, what kind of a war are you preparing for? To me, that sounds like a perfectly logical question to ask. If we don't know what war that our government and our military and our Department of Defence is preparing for, how can we ever assess whether we're putting too much money in or too little money, whether we're doing the right thing? Now, last night in the Defence Minister's speech, he started into this area of talking to it. But we note that I don't think we will convince the Australian people that they should be prepared to come up with the money or to come up with the service until we start talking about the magnitude of the threat. And the magnitude of the threat is China, and the Prime Minister will meet with President Xi this afternoon, but we've got to stand up to this. We can't keep saying, you know, are we preparing for some magic country coming out of nowhere? No, we're preparing for the unknown caused by China's increased aggression. And for China to throw us a bone of a sideline meeting at the G20 and expect, as the Chinese Premier said, to meet us halfway. He said Australia has got to meet China halfway. No, we don't. We must be strong enough to stand up to China, backed by our alliance partners, stand up to China and say what we are. Thank God the Prime Minister did say that he was going to not surrender any of our interests or our values.
A little bit of realism we need on this day where I think a lot of people are seeing or reading too much into this meeting with President Xi. It's good that we're having the meeting. Don't get me wrong, it's good that we're having the meeting, but we've got to stick to our values as well. Former military man, now Senator Jim Molan, thank you as always.